My beloved child, stay with this moment, because what you are about to hear is not another ordinary story. It begins after a silence that lasted far longer than anyone expected. No one noticed the invisible shift when you finally chose peace over chasing, growth over fear, and quiet confidence over endless questions. But someone did. The one whose heart has remained mysteriously connected to yours. And the moment they witnessed the change within you, something inside them broke open. The tears they tried to hide were not born from sadness alone, they came from realizing they had underestimated the strength, the patience, and the light you carried all along. Think about this for a second. What if the greatest turning point in your journey never arrived with loud celebrations or dramatic words? What if it appeared in complete silence, while you were simply becoming the version of yourself you were always meant to be? That is why this story matters. Because sometimes the biggest news begins where no one is looking. While others believed nothing was happening, unseen pieces were quietly moving into place. Every lesson you accepted, every disappointment you survived, every time you refused to give up on your own future became part of a picture that someone else could no longer ignore. Now imagine the other side of the story. For so long, they convinced themselves that time would always be on their side. They believed there would always be another chance, another tomorrow, another perfect moment to reveal everything hidden inside their heart. But then they saw something unexpected. They saw you walking forward, not looking back, not waiting for permission, not searching for validation. And that single moment felt more powerful than 1,000 conversations. Suddenly they understood that destiny does not wait forever. Opportunities quietly change shape. People grow. Hearts mature. Paths evolve. Pause here for one question. What if the decision that changed everything was one you barely even noticed making? Perhaps it was choosing hope instead of regret. Perhaps it was smiling when life expected you to fall apart. Perhaps it was believing your future deserved more than your past. Whatever it was, its effect reached farther than you could possibly imagine. Like ripples spreading across still water, your quiet transformation touched someone who never expected to feel so deeply again. This is where the story becomes impossible to predict. Instead of feeling jealousy, they felt admiration. Instead of anger, they felt respect. Instead of fear, they felt the overwhelming realization that they had almost missed someone truly extraordinary. That realization became impossible to hide. Memories they had carefully locked away returned one after another. Every conversation. Every shared smile. Every unfinished dream. Every moment they once dismissed suddenly carried a meaning they could no longer escape. Their emotions overflowed, not because they were weak, but because truth has a way of arriving all at once after being ignored for far too long. And here is the part almost nobody sees. The tears were never about losing hope. They were about finally understanding your worth. Sometimes life delays recognition until both people are ready to understand what they could not see before. Growth changes perspective. Time reveals hidden value. Distance uncovers forgotten feelings. That is why what happened next could never have happened earlier. So don't rush away just yet. The biggest revelation has not even appeared. The reason those tears became the beginning of an entirely new chapter is something no one around them expected. And when that hidden reason finally comes into the light, every piece of this journey will begin to make perfect sense. A quiet truth is about to surface, and if you've stayed with this story until now, you're standing at the edge of the moment where everything begins to connect. Those tears were only the first sign. What followed afterward carried even greater meaning, because once someone truly recognizes the value of another soul, pretending nothing has changed becomes impossible. They tried to convince themselves it was only an emotional moment. It will pass, they whispered. But it didn't. The next morning, your memory returned before anything else. Through the busiest hours of the day, your presence quietly echoed in their thoughts. Every place reminded them of a possibility they had almost let disappear. Every success they celebrated somehow felt incomplete. They smiled on the outside, yet inside a question refused to leave them alone. What if I waited too long? That question became heavier with every passing hour. You see, there comes a point in every meaningful connection when excuses lose their power. The heart no longer asks, who's right? It begins asking, what truly matters? And for the first time, they stopped focusing on what they feared, and started focusing on what they genuinely valued. Here is what makes this moment different. They were no longer hoping you would stay exactly where they left you. Instead, they began hoping you were becoming happier, stronger, more fulfilled, even if they weren't part of that chapter. That realization surprised even them. Because real admiration grows when someone witnesses another person rising despite every challenge life placed before them. Now imagine standing at a crossroads. One road leads back toward old habits, old doubts, and endless hesitation. The other leads toward honesty, courage, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Without fully realizing it, they had already taken the first step down the second road. And that step changed everything. Something inside them quietly whispered, if I remain silent now, I may spend years wondering what could have been. Those words echoed louder than fear. Meanwhile, your own journey continued. You weren't trying to prove anything anymore. You weren't chasing approval or waiting for someone else to define your future. You simply kept moving forward, trusting that every chapter, whether joyful or difficult, was preparing you for something greater. Ironically, that calm confidence became impossible to ignore. The more peacefully you walked your own path, the more deeply they respected the person you had become. This is often how life's greatest surprises unfold. Not through dramatic announcements, but through quiet transformations that nobody notices until it's too late to deny them. If this story is speaking to something deep within you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share the one word that describes the kind of future you're choosing, and if these messages continue to inspire your journey, consider subscribing so we can keep exploring them together. But don't leave yet. Because something unexpected has just begun behind the scenes. Someone close to them noticed the change. They noticed the longer pauses, the thoughtful silence, the distant look whenever your name crossed their mind. Questions started appearing. Is everything okay? Why do you seem different lately? They smiled, but the answer stayed hidden. Some feelings cannot be explained until the heart is finally ready to speak them aloud. And that moment is drawing closer than either of you realizes. Stay with this story a little longer. Because the conversation they never thought they would have is almost here, and when those long-hidden words are finally spoken, they won't simply reveal emotion. They will reveal the truth that has been quietly growing ever since the day they saw what you finally did. Before another second slips away, listen closely, because this is the chapter where silence can no longer hide the truth. The change that began inside them was no longer something they could push aside. Every attempt to distract themselves only brought them back to the same realization: you had unknowingly become the standard against which they measured every meaningful moment. One evening, as everything around them seemed perfectly ordinary, an unexpected conversation changed the atmosphere completely. Someone asked a simple question. "What happened to you? You don't seem like yourself anymore." For a brief moment, they almost laughed it off. But then, they couldn't. Their voice grew quiet. Their eyes looked away. And after a long pause, they admitted something they had never been brave enough to say before. "I didn't realize what I had until I saw them becoming stronger without me." Those words carried no pride. No excuses. Only honesty. That honesty brought a strange kind of peace. Because the heart becomes lighter the moment it stops running from the truth. From that day forward, they began replaying every memory with fresh eyes. Conversations that once felt ordinary suddenly became unforgettable. Small acts of kindness you probably never thought twice about became moments they wished they had appreciated more. They finally understood that the greatest people often aren't the loudest, they're the ones who quietly leave an unforgettable impact. Now let me ask you something. What if your greatest strength was never the ability to hold on, but the courage to keep becoming your best self, even when nobody seemed to notice? That is exactly what made this story take such an unexpected turn. Because while you were focused on your own growth, someone else's perspective was being completely rewritten. They no longer saw you through the lens of yesterday. They saw you through the possibilities of tomorrow. And tomorrow suddenly felt far more valuable than all the missed chances behind them. The most surprising part? They stopped imagining what life would have looked like if nothing had changed. Instead, they began wondering what could still be possible if honesty finally replaced hesitation. That thought refused to leave. It followed them into quiet mornings. It appeared during ordinary afternoons. It stayed with them through peaceful nights. Not because destiny was forcing anything, but because truth has a remarkable way of returning until it is finally acknowledged. At that very same time, your own path continued unfolding in beautiful ways. You were discovering confidence that no longer depended on anyone else's approval. You were learning that peace is not something another person gives you, it is something you build within yourself. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. The moment you stopped trying to convince the world of your worth, the world quietly began recognizing it on its own. Now the distance between two separate journeys is beginning to grow smaller. Not through pressure. Not through chasing. But through understanding. Because meaningful connections are strengthened by growth, not by fear. Before this chapter comes to a close, remember one thing. Sometimes the biggest news isn't that someone cried. The biggest news is why they cried. They cried because they finally saw the person you had become. They cried because your quiet transformation awakened something they could no longer ignore. And they cried because deep inside, they realized that the next decision they make could shape an entirely new future. So stay until the next chapter. Because the choice that follows this realization won't simply surprise them. It may become the moment that changes the direction of both your journeys forever. Everything has been leading to this moment, so don't look away now. The story has never been about a single emotional reaction. It has always been about what happens after the heart finally accepts the truth. Tears may reveal what words cannot, but choices reveal what a person truly believes. And now, a choice was waiting to be made. For days, they carried a quiet battle within themselves. One voice whispered, "Stay silent. It's safer." Another replied, "If you stay silent now, you'll always wonder what might have happened." That inner conversation grew stronger with every sunrise. The fear of being misunderstood slowly became smaller than the desire to be genuine. And that changed everything. They no longer wanted to impress anyone. They no longer wanted to hide behind perfect timing. Instead, they wanted one thing above all else, to be honest. Not because honesty guarantees an outcome, but because honesty sets the heart free. Meanwhile, your own journey continued with remarkable calm. You weren't waiting for signs. You weren't measuring your future by someone else's decisions. You had discovered something far more valuable, confidence that came from within. Ironically, that quiet confidence became the very reason this story reached its turning point. The version of you they once remembered was no longer standing still. You had become wiser, kinder, more resilient, more certain of your own path. And seeing that transformation inspired them to begin transforming themselves as well. This is the hidden truth few people ever realize. Real change spreads. When one person chooses growth, courage, and peace, others are often inspired to do the same. That is exactly what happened here. Instead of looking backward with regret forever, they began looking forward with hope. Not a hope built on fantasy, but a hope built on becoming better than they were yesterday. Now imagine two separate roads that seem to drift farther apart with time. Without either traveler noticing, both roads slowly begin curving toward the same horizon. Not because life forces them together, but because growth changes direction. Perspective changes direction. Wisdom changes direction. Sometimes the future surprises us not by changing who we meet, but by changing who we become before we meet again. And perhaps that is the greatest message hidden inside this entire journey. Never underestimate the quiet decisions you make when nobody is watching. Choosing forgiveness instead of bitterness. Choosing patience instead of panic. Choosing purpose instead of fear. Those unseen choices often become the very moments that reshape tomorrow. If this story has stayed with you until this final chapter, thank you for sharing this journey. I'd love to know which moment spoke to you the most, so feel free to leave a comment below. And if you enjoy stories that explore growth, hope, and meaningful connections, subscribing is a wonderful way to continue the journey together. Before we part, carry this thought with you. The biggest news was never that someone couldn't stop crying. The biggest news was that your quiet transformation reminded another heart that change is always possible. Whether paths cross again or continue in different directions, the lesson remains the same. Never stop becoming the person you were created to be. Because the strongest light is rarely the loudest. It is the one that keeps shining, even when no one seems to notice. And one day, without warning, that light becomes impossible for the world to ignore. Until the next story, keep moving forward. Your next chapter may already be closer than you think. One final mystery remains, because every meaningful journey leaves behind a question that only time can answer. If you've stayed until this moment, then you already know this story was never about convincing anyone to believe in fate. It was about discovering what becomes possible when one person chooses growth over fear. Days continued to pass. Life returned to its familiar rhythm. The world around both of you looked exactly the same. Yet beneath the surface, everything had changed. The person who once struggled to understand your value now carried something they had never carried before, a quiet determination to become more honest with themselves. They realized that the greatest opportunities are rarely announced with flashing lights. They often appear disguised as ordinary moments that ask one simple question. Will you choose courage this time? That question stayed with them. Not for an hour. Not for a day. But long enough to reshape the way they looked at every decision ahead. At the same time, your own path continued opening new doors. You smiled more freely. You trusted yourself more deeply. You stopped measuring your worth by the opinions of others and started measuring it by the peace you carried within. That inner peace became your greatest strength. Because people notice confidence that doesn't demand attention. They notice kindness that expects nothing in return. They notice resilience that quietly refuses to give up. Perhaps that is the greatest surprise hidden inside this entire journey. The transformation you believed no one could see was seen. The courage you thought went unnoticed was noticed. The hope you protected during difficult seasons inspired someone in ways you may never fully realize. And maybe that is how life's most meaningful chapters are written. Not through perfect endings, but through people becoming better than they once were. So, wherever your own story leads from here, remember this. Keep choosing wisdom over worry. Keep choosing purpose over pressure. Keep choosing growth over fear. Because every step you take toward becoming your best self creates possibilities that cannot always be seen today, but may become clear tomorrow. As this story comes to its final close, leave with one lasting thought. The greatest victory was never making someone cry. The greatest victory was becoming someone whose character, strength, and quiet confidence could touch another heart without force, without noise, and without losing yourself along the way. Some stories end with applause. Some end with answers. But the most unforgettable stories end with transformation. And perhaps, your most beautiful chapter is still waiting to be written. Until next time, keep your heart open, your mind clear, and your steps steady. The future has a remarkable way of rewarding those who never stop growing. There is one last thought, and it may be the one that stays with you long after this story ends. Imagine looking back years from now. Not at the moments of uncertainty. Not at the waiting. Not even at the questions that once filled your mind. Instead, imagine remembering the day you decided that your future would no longer depend on fear. Because that was the true beginning. Everything else was simply catching up. The person whose heart was overwhelmed with emotion eventually understood something that changed their entire perspective. They had spent so much time wondering whether life would bring another opportunity. They forgot that opportunities are often created by the people willing to become better than they were yesterday. That realization filled them with gratitude. Not because every answer suddenly appeared, but because they finally understood the value of personal growth. Meanwhile, your own journey continued to shine in ways you couldn't always see. New conversations entered your life. Fresh opportunities quietly unfolded. Unexpected encouragement arrived when you needed it most. The confidence you had built during difficult seasons became the foundation for brighter days ahead. And that's how life often works. The chapters that once felt like endings become the very chapters that prepare us for new beginnings. So, if you're listening to these words today, let them remind you of something powerful. Never believe that your quiet efforts are wasted. Every act of patience, every moment of courage, every choice to remain kind, every decision to keep moving forward, is shaping a future that today's eyes cannot fully see. The world often celebrates dramatic moments, but lasting change is usually born in ordinary days.